Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big little guy, the Brous Blades Sniper. First off, I want to thank my buddies Frankie and Bird over at the Birdshot IV channel. They're entertaining folks. They do gear reviews as well. Go ahead and check them out. Subscribe. They're pretty excellent, and they loan me this gear, so they're excellent for that reason as well. Let's do a little size comparison here. This is not a tiny knife. I'm going to put it right here next to an Ontario Rat number 1, and so you can see here that blade length-wise, this guy has actually got a longer blade than the Rat 1, and it's way bigger than your Rat 2, which just really pales in comparison, although you can see that the width of the blade is pretty analogous. Here's your Spyderco Delica, and another big, long, murdery sort of blade, the ZT452CF, which does take the cake in murderiness here, but is still an interesting little knife. Anyways, there you go. And then I'm going to advise that you do check out the disassembly video before you watch this review, because I'm going to talk a lot about the construction. And that's much easier shown by just sending you that video than by doing anything else. So there you go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular pocket knife. So on the good side, the construction of this knife is very different, and so Brous does get points for uniqueness, for trying something new. It's not without its downside, certainly, but the fact that this is two chunks of aluminum that are kind of sandwiched together using the aluminum itself as standoffs, or the fact that the clip is an integral part of the rest of the steel on the inside there. This, when I took it apart, as you saw in the disassembly, kind of caught me off guard, like, wow, that's new, that's different, that's interesting. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but it is still different, and so I gotta give points there. Another thing that I like a lot is actually visible right here, and that's this right here. Brous has chosen to number the knife, which I usually do like very much. I feel like it's a nice little touch. It makes people think to themselves, okay, this one's different, it's unique. Even if they made 1,000 of them, it's kind of nice to know that I have got number 323 right here. It's just a nice little step, but the place that he did it is really excellent because you never really see it particularly. You've got the logo up here, but the rest of the knife is very sterile, and really you're only going to find that number, whoa there, if you're looking for it. And so it's a great little location for it, and it shouldn't wear out over time. I like that a lot. That's a nice little detail he's got going on there. It has many colors and anodization. You've got, in addition to your normal silvers and your blacks, there's, I believe, a blue, there's a... and there's this guy, which my fiance called Michael Jackson's jacket in Thriller Red, which is pretty descriptive. As she said, the entire knife had a little bit of a Thriller thing for her, but, hey, what can I say? Anyways, I like the fact that they're offering different colors here. It's very, very often the case that if you want a tactical knife, your options are black and black. And it's really nice that here you can put a little more color into your life if you'd like to. The blade stock on this guy is relatively thin, which I like very much. In terms of blade thickness, we're right around the same department as your Ontario Rat number 1 here. Which means it's not a terrible slicer. Had they used a very thick sort of blade stock, we would have a problem here, but that's kind of a nice aspect of what they got going. And the steel on it, by the way, is D2 steel, which is fine. It's good to go. Speaking of the D2, the DLC coating here, you can get it in either a satin blade finish or this sort of a DLC, but the DLC is actually doing work here because D2 steel does tend to rust a little bit, and so the DLC protects the steel itself from that rusting. I'm not going to go so far as to say I like the DLC aesthetically, but it is good that it's doing work here, as opposed to most of the time where it's just being DLC. And then finally, the action on this guy is fine. It's not the world's sharpest intent, but it is reliable. It will pretty much always flip, no problem. And in terms of shutting, it's not false shutty, but it is at the same time plenty smooth. So, I do like the action here. Maybe I'm not giving it enough credit here. It's a good action. There's no problem whatsoever with it. So, that's your good side. It's got a relatively unique construction. The writing on the flipper tab for the limited edition is a nice little thing. The anodization color availability is cool. I like the fact that they're using a relatively thin blade stock and decent enough steel, which is being protected by this DLC, and they've coupled it with an action that's pretty good. Let's talk a little bit about the grate here. So on the great side is the size and weight of this little guy. This is not a heavy knife. You're looking at just about 3 ounces with this guy, as opposed to, for a similarly sized knife, your 452 CF, 4.3, or another similarly sized knife, the Benchmade Contigo, also on loan from Birdshot IV, you get 5.83 ounces. Holy crap, that's a lot of ounces. And so this guy comes across subjectively as being a very light knife, and it's also relatively small for the amount of blade that you get. You get a very similar blade length as your ZT452 CF, but if you put them both in the pocket, the sniper is considerably smaller. And because of the deep carry clip, it's very, very subtle in that way. So the sniper is a very small knife for the amount of blade that you're getting here. And it's also pretty damn lightweight. So that's what's great about this knife, is that it is very, very easy to carry, and it is super thin and lightweight. So well done there, Brous. Let's go on to the bad. Okay, so first off, on the bad side, they offer many anodization colors, but they do not offer it in yellow. And given how much this knife looks like a banana, I feel like that's a real missed opportunity there. The tactical banana market is completely untapped. I don't know how I can put this more clearly, but there is always money in the banana brand. So anyways, that's a missed opportunity. The Sharpening Trail on here, they kind of missed the boat a little bit because, as you can see, the plunge grind kind of goes down right in this area. But unfortunately, the Sharpening Trail doesn't extend quite far enough out, and so you get this little area where the blade kicks out at the bottom there. It's not the end of the world. You'll work through it in sharpening. A lot of people do it, but that is a little mistake there. The bearing system on this guy, this is kind of good and bad. On the Brous website, it's referred to as the proprietary Brous bearing system. Taking it apart, it looked like every other damn bearing system out there. So, you know, if he's trying to be super special, it's not that special. But at the same time, it also means that it's not a bad proprietary system. So often proprietary systems are really crappy. This one works just fine. So there you go. Looks like any other bearing knife to me, though. The lock bar jimping here is a serious hot spot. As you're gripping this knife, your index finger goes across that and then, unfortunately, kind of digs into your finger because this little area sticks up a little bit above everything else. However, then this goes on to the next bad thing. That's pretty much the only grip you're getting on this knife. This is a very slippery knife. A lot of these anodized aluminum knives tend to be that way. And so if there's any kind of water or, you know, lubrication, if you will, you're going to have a bad time. This will slip right on out of your hand. This is not a Vaseline factory sort of knife for you. The blade shape, to me, strikes me as a little bit strange. It's kind of got a tactical fillet knife thing going on here, but the thing is, it's a little too thick, I feel like, to be a compelling fillet knife. And so, in practice, you end up with a design that has a fair amount of unusable blade because it slopes away from, if you're cutting onto a flat surface, the flipper tab obstructs a good part of the blade, and the rest of it slopes away. For a lot of cuts, it's going to be just fine, but I honestly don't get the blade shape here. It doesn't make that much sense to me. But it is a little bit on the murdery side. Being as big as it is, if you whip this guy out in the lunchroom, even if it does look kind of like a banana, it's going to be a little bit scary to a lot of people because of the size. The price on this guy is a little bit high. You're looking at $209 for this. And the materials are not quite where I'd want them to be at that kind of price. For $209, you're getting very easily high-quality titanium frame locks, and this is aluminum. You're getting usually something like an S35 VN or a 204P or something along those lines at $200. This guy's in a D2 steel. I don't entirely see that price tag in this knife. But, you know, hey, whatever. It's not completely out of line, though. The knife is weirdly large. I'll say that 100%. I don't know why this is a 3.75-inch blade. I feel like this knife would have been much more interesting coming in a little bit smaller. Being as thin as it is, it's almost unwieldy to be using. I mean, the tip is way the heck out there. And so, although there may be a situation in which this is perfect at this size, for me at least, I feel like this would have been more compelling, just shrunk down a little bit so that the blade shape was the blade was a little bit shorter. There you go. And then finally, on the bad side, the lockup on this knife is frighteningly early. I mentioned this in the disassembly video, and I'm going to see if I can show it to you here. But if you gently open the knife, where's my flashlight? Here we go. If you just gently open the knife, and I'll put a little more light on the subject here, you can see that the lockup here is, you know, borderline 5 or 10%. And if you flip the knife open with some wrist, a best case scenario for extra lockup, your lockup gets to maybe 15, 20%. That's really, really light. And if you open the knife manually, which you're not going to do very often, it's right on the edge. I'm not going to say it's ugly. I'm not going to say it's a defect, but wow, is that lockup early. And according to the bird loan it to me, it was even earlier to start with. So that's borderline. I'd like to see around 50% here. Not the end of the world, though. So on the bad side, they failed to acknowledge that there is always money in the Banana brand. They missed the Sharpening Trail. The proprietary bearing system is just a bearing system. Maybe good, actually. The lock bar jimping is a bit of a hot spot. There's no other way to hold onto this knife in water or anything else. It's got kind of a weird blade shape. It's a little murdery. The price is high given the materials, and it's weirdly large and with a very, very early lockup. Let's talk about the ugly. Okay, on the ugly side, the construction on this knife honestly feels a little bit fragile. When I posted this guy on the Instagram, I had a couple of people reach out to me and say that their knives became unusable after some amount of time due to some of these issues. One person had a clip break off, one person had the some whole screw stripping, and I think a part of that is because the majority of this construction is just aluminum. In addition to meaning that, for instance, scratches in the anodization are not really fixable straightforward, the steel screws here are going straight into the aluminum body here. And similarly, the liners, if you look at the disassembly video, the liners are held in by screws that are very small screws, shallow screws that are going straight into aluminum. And that right there, much like going to grad school in Las Vegas, is absolutely a recipe for stripping. So you got to keep that in mind. This is not a knife that I'm not going to trust over 10 years necessarily. Also add to it the fact that there are just a couple of screws that are holding this knife together. These two both going into aluminum, and then the pivot, which is probably fine. And those extra shallow screws for the liners, I just don't know that I trust this guy in the long term. The other issue is that the clip, like I pointed out in the disassembly video, is actually an extension of the liner on the inside. So the same piece of metal that makes your liner lock over here turns out to be the one that folds around as the clip. And that's a neat idea, and it's different, and it's interesting. But the thing is, this means that if you break off the clip, or if you altogether spring the clip, you can probably disassemble the knife and rebend it back. But if you break this clip off for whatever reason, you need an entire new lock for the knife. You need a new liner, and so you'd need to fit a new lock. And that's not terribly good. And that's honestly why integral clips usually are not a thing on knives. In addition to being very hard to do properly, I don't know that I've ever seen one in production. They've got some serious disadvantages, because if the clip breaks off, you need a new knife. And this isn't quite that bad, and maybe Brous could send you the interior. More likely, he'd want to see the knife and fix it that way. But I'm just not in love with that choice there. It just makes the clip not only a little bit more vulnerable, but frankly, if it breaks, you're kind of hosed. So those are the two ugly things here. The construction on this knife seems relatively fragile, and I've heard from a couple of people who've had trouble. And the broken clip thing, if that happens, you are just up 32 flavors of creek. It's not pleasant there. So there you go. Let's talk final conclusion. Honestly, I just don't know what or who this knife is for, because it's a little bit too long and scary for the office, unless you happen to work at Cold Steel, in which case you're probably fine. But this is a knife that's most comfortable in light use sorts of situations, for envelopes and boxes and things like that. This is not your woodsman survival sort of knife whatsoever. It's shaped like a fillet knife in terms of your blade, but the thing is, it's still relatively thick, and I don't know that I'd want to use D2 steel anywhere near water, especially salt water. And it's meant to be a tactical sort of blade. I mean, it's bright red and black DLC, but it's constructed in a way that's not super tactically sound. You know, if your clip breaks off, the knife becomes, well, clipless forever, roughly. And, you know, the whole thing is secured, the liners is secured with little tiny screws into aluminum. It's not a super beefy construction. So, at the end of the day, you end up with this kind of strange, lightweight, tactical murder banana. And that's cool. I'm all for murder bananas, but I don't know what this is really doing here. So, you know, recommendation? I don't know that I can recommend it because I don't get it. I don't understand where this is going or who this is aimed at. It looks kind of neat, but that's kind of where I end. So I guess I'll leave it as, if it looks cool to you, if you're willing to pay the price for the materials, and if you're not planning to beat it up too much, then, I mean, I guess, sure, have at it. But in terms of getting a recommendation from me, well, much like the snipers it's named after, that's a long shot. Get it? Okay. So, yeah, I'm afraid I can't really recommend this knife because I don't really understand this knife. If you get it, let me know in the comments what the heck this is for. Otherwise, just have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.